Welcome back to the Behavior Code. I'm Maria.
And I'm Gabriel. So, Maria, let's start with a big question. Have you ever looked at someone, a CEO, a top athlete, a groundbreaking artist, and just wondered, how do they do it?
All the time. It's that question of, is it just raw talent, luck, or is there something deeper going on? Some kind of internal code they're running that the rest of us don't have.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. The psychology of high achievers. We're going beyond the surface level advice. Wake up early, work hard, and we're looking at the core psychological foundations.
We're talking about their mindset, their emotional patterns, their habits, and even the hidden costs of that drive. It's not always a pretty picture.
Right. So here's the roadmap for today. We'll start with their core psychology, then move into the cognitive patterns that fuel them. After that, we'll explore their emotional framework and their daily systems.
And we'll also dedicate a whole segment to the dark side of high achievement before finishing with how they stay mentally healthy. There are a ton of practical takeaways here for everyone. So let's get into it.
Okay, segment 1, the core psychology. Where do we even begin?
I think the absolute foundation is what psychologists call identity-level motivation. For a high achiever, success isn't just something they want. It's part of who they are.
Right? So it's not, I want to run a marathon. It's, I am a runner.
Precisely. It's the difference between outcome-based habits and identity-based habits. An outcome goal is, I will write a novel. An identity is, I am a writer. So what does a writer do? They write every day. It becomes a non-negotiable part of their routine. They're not constantly battling for motivation because the action of writing is a direct expression of their identity. It's not a choice you have to make over and over. It's just a thing you do because it's who you are. This shift from I have to I am is a game changer.
That removes so much friction. You're not relying on willpower, you're just acting in alignment with your self-perception, which leads perfectly into the next point, doesn't it? Internal locus of control. Think about someone like Kobe Bryant. He didn't just want to win championships. He saw himself as a basketball player, a black mamba. Every decision, from his punishing workouts at 4 a.m. to his meticulous diet and film study, flowed from that core identity. He wasn't motivated by the goal of a single championship. He was defined by the daily process of being an elite athlete. The championships were simply a byproduct of his identity.
Absolutely. Talk about that. Or think of a great writer like Stephen King. He has a famous quote about writing every single day, even on holidays. He doesn't do it because he has a deadline. He does it because he is a writer. It's an integral part of his identity, and the daily act of writing reinforces that identity. It's a powerful loop. It's like the difference between going on a diet and being a healthy eater. One is a temporary, often painful series of actions. The other is a permanent state of being that guides your choices naturally. The high achiever embodies the identity, so the actions that support it, like choosing whole foods or exercising regularly, become automatic, almost effortless. They don't drain willpower in the same way. And what's powerful about that is it provides a framework for decision-making. If you're a healthy person, the choice between a salad and a burger isn't a constant struggle of willpower. You just naturally gravitate towards the salad because that's what a healthy person does. The identity guides the behavior.
Well, it's this fundamental belief that you are in the driver's seat of your life. Your actions, your mindset, your responses, they all shape your outcomes. The opposite is an external locus of control where you believe life just happens to you. You're a passenger. You blame traffic, your boss, the economy, your upbringing.
The universe, bad luck, Mercury in retrograde, right. High achievers just don't think that way. When they face a setback, a project fails, they lose a competition, they get negative feedback, their first question isn't, whose fault is this? It's, what is my role in this? And what can I do differently next time? This fosters incredible resilience because they never see themselves as victims of circumstance.
Yeah, it's about ownership, total ownership. And that ownership mindset is powered by the third pillar here, high self-efficacy.
I love this one. It's not about knowing everything. It's the core belief, I can figure this out.
It's everything. It's the entrepreneur looking at a market no one has cracked and thinking, I can figure this out. It's the scientist facing an impossible problem, the athlete facing a stronger opponent, the artist trying a new medium. That core belief that you have the capacity to learn, adapt, and overcome it's a better predictor of success than innate talent. Talent is a starting point, but self-efficacy is the engine that gets you through the hard parts.
So, to recap this core psychology, it's this is who I am, identity, I am in control, locus of control, and I can figure it out, self-efficacy. That is a potent combination.
And this isn't about arrogance. It's not, I already know the answer. It's a humble confidence in your ability to learn. It's the belief that even if you don't know how right now, you can develop the skills and find the resources to solve the problem. It's the psychological launch pad for everything else. Which brings us to our next segment, how they actually think. The cognitive patterns that drive them.
Okay, segment 2. Let's talk cognition. I think the first thing that stands out to me is obsessive curiosity. They don't just ask what, they ask why and how and what if.
Yes, they have this insatiable need to understand things at a fundamental level. It's not enough to know that something works. They need to know why it works. They deconstruct everything. Think of a master chef who doesn't just follow a recipe but understands the chemical reactions happening in the pan. That curiosity is the engine of mastery. It pushes them to learn more, to experiment, to connect dots others don't see.
And connecting the dots is a perfect segue into the next pattern, pattern recognition and strategic thinking. It's a relentless drive to peel back the layers of the onion. They don't just accept because that's how it's always been done. That phrase is like a red flag to them, a challenge to dig deeper. It's the difference between a musician who can play a song and a composer who understands the music theory behind why those notes, in that order, evoke a specific emotion.
It's the ability to zoom out from the day-to-day tasks and see the bigger picture, the entire system. They think in systems, not just to-do lists. They're constantly asking, what are the second and third order consequences of this decision? While others are focused on the immediate effect, they are mapping out the ripple effects that will appear months or even years down the line.
It's like playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. They're thinking several moves ahead, which of course requires a huge amount of delayed gratification. A great example is how a high-achieving CEO might analyze a new market. They're not just looking at the immediate profit potential. They're studying demographic shifts, technological trends, potential regulatory changes. They're building a mental model of the entire ecosystem to see where the real long-term opportunity lies.
The classic marshmallow test. For anyone who doesn't know, it was a study where kids were offered 1 marshmallow now or 2 if they could wait 15 minutes.
And the kids who could wait for the bigger reward tended to have better life outcomes years later, higher test scores, better careers, better health. High achievers live this. They are willing to put in the boring, unglamorous, unsexy work for years, sometimes decades, for a payoff that's way down the road. They naturally think in multi-year arcs and can visualize that future reward with enough clarity to make the present sacrifice feel worthwhile.
It's a cognitive muscle, and that long-term focus often manifests as, well, what we call productive obsession.
This is a tricky one because obsession has negative connotations, but there's a fine line between a destructive obsession and a productive one. The truth is, you don't get to the top of any truly competitive field without a level of intensity that looks a little crazy to the outside world. It's a focus so deep that everything else fades into the background.
Completely. It's that deep, unwavering focus on a single domain that allows for the thousands of hours of deliberate practice needed for mastery. It fuels them through the inevitable plateaus and the crushing failures. It's not just passion, which can be fleeting. It's a deeper, more enduring drive. But it also hints at the emotional side of things, which is our next segment.
Okay, let's dive into the emotional framework of high achievers. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's start with failure. Their relationship with failure is completely different from most people's.
Totally. For most of us, failure feels personal. It's a judgment on our worth, our intelligence, our capability. For them, failure is data. It's just information, stripped of all the emotional baggage. It's a data point that says this path is not the right one. Try another.
Exactly. It's not, I am a failure, it's, this approach failed. What did I learn? They operate on what you could call a micro-failure feedback loop. They're constantly testing hypotheses, failing on a small, manageable scale, learning and iterating. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's an indispensable part of the process of achieving success.
And to do that, you need a high tolerance for discomfort. You have to be willing to feel awkward, incompetent, and, well, to fail. Think of a startup founder. Most startups fail. A high-achieving founder doesn't see each failed product launch as a personal failing. They see it as market research. The market is telling them something, and their job is to listen to that data and pivot.
They don't just tolerate discomfort, they often seek it out. They understand that the feeling of being stretched, challenged, and even a little confused is a signal of growth. If you're always comfortable, you're not improving, you're stagnating. So they lean into the hard conversations, the tough projects, the grueling practice sessions that others avoid.
And often that challenge comes from competition. But again, they handle it differently. Let's talk about controlled competitiveness.
Right. They use competition as fuel, not as a weapon to tear others down. And importantly, their primary competitor is often themselves.
It's that internal versus external competition. They're less concerned with being better than the person next to them and more obsessed with being better than they were yesterday. That's a much more sustainable and powerful source of motivation because it's entirely within their control. They're not demoralized when someone else succeeds. They're inspired to push their own boundaries.
And underlying all of this, failure, discomfort, competition, is a high level of emotional regulation. You can't perform under pressure if your emotions are hijacking you.
Absolutely. They have this ability to stay calm and focused when everything is going wrong. They use techniques like reframing, seeing a threat as a challenge or an obstacle as an opportunity, and cognitive distancing, which is creating space between yourself and your negative thoughts so you don't get swept away by them.
Instead of, I'm so anxious, it's, I'm noticing a feeling of anxiety. That small shift in language creates enough mental space to choose a more effective response rather than reacting impulsively. It's a genuine superpower in high-stakes environments.
It really is. Okay, so we've covered their psychology, their thinking, and their emotional framework. Let's get practical. After the break, we'll talk about the behavioral habits and daily systems that make it all happen.
Welcome back to the Behavior Code. We're talking about the nuts and bolts now. Segment 4, Behavioral Habits and Daily Systems. First up, and this one is huge, ruthless prioritization.
Warren Buffett has that great quote, "The difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything."
It's so true. High achievers understand that their time and energy are their most precious, non-renewable resources. They don't add more to their plate, they relentlessly eliminate. They are masters of saying no to things that are good opportunities in order to say yes to the few that are truly great. Psychologically, it's hard for most people to do because we have a fear of missing out, but they are incredibly disciplined about protecting their focus.
And what they say yes to, they approach with consistency over intensity. Steve Jobs was famous for this. He was as proud of the products he didn't make as the ones he did. He killed projects that were good but not insanely great to pour all of Apple's resources into the ones that could be revolutionary. That's ruthless prioritization.
Yes, we all get these bursts of motivation. New Year's resolutions are a classic example, where we work like crazy for a weekend and then burn out and revert to our old ways. High achievers know that's not the path. They rely on daily habits and systems, not fleeting inspiration. They build routines that carry them forward even on the days they don't feel motivated.
The writer who writes 1 page a day, every single day, will have a 365-page manuscript at the end of the year. The athlete who does their drills, even on the days they don't feel like it, builds an unbreakable foundation of skill. Small, consistent efforts compound into extraordinary results over time. It's the magic of the mundane.
And how do they make sure those efforts are effective? Feedback loops. They are relentless about seeking feedback.
Yeah, they don't hide from criticism. They hunt for it. Because they've separated their ego from their performance, as we discussed, they can hear tough feedback without getting defensive. They see it as a gift. They know that honest feedback, even when it stings, is the fastest way to get better. It requires a real suspension of ego and a commitment to growth over comfort.
That's the key phrase, suspension of ego. And finally, they integrate all this with structured reflection.
Right. They don't just work. They work. And then they deliberately stop and think about the work. This could be daily journaling, a weekly review process, or a more formal performance audit with a coach or mentor. They ask questions like, what went well this week? What didn't? What will I do differently next week?
Reflection is what turns experience into insight. It's the accelerator of improvement. Without it, you can be consistent for years, but just be reinforcing bad habits. Okay, so we've painted a pretty rosy picture so far.
I was just thinking that. It sounds great, but there's always a flip side. Which brings us to segment 5, the dark side of high achievement.
This is so important to talk about because the highlight reels we see on social media are never the full story. Let's start with perfectionism. There's a critical difference between a healthy striving for excellence, adaptive perfectionism, and a paralyzing fear of making mistakes, which is maladaptive perfectionism.
Right. The latter is so dangerous because it sounds noble, but it's really just fear disguised as high standards. It's the writer who never finishes their novel because it's not perfect yet. It's the founder who never launches because the product isn't perfect. It completely sabotages progress and leads to inaction.
And that perfectionism is often tied to workaholism and identity fusion. This is when your achievement isn't just something you do, it is you. Your self-worth becomes completely and dangerously fused with your professional success. I am successful becomes I am a person of worth.
And that's a terrifying place to be. Because if you have a professional failure, it's not just a setback. It feels like a fundamental failure of yourself. The emotional stakes become way too high.
The flip side is, I failed, therefore I am worthless. That's a terrifying place to be. Because if you have a professional failure, it's not just a setback at work. It feels like a fundamental failure of your entire self. The emotional stakes become way too high to sustain. It really is. This level of intense focus can also lead to loneliness and social trade-offs. When you're that dedicated to a single pursuit, other parts of life, friendships, family relationships, hobbies, can wither from neglect. You simply don't have the time or energy for them.
And there's this feeling of being misunderstood. Your priorities are so different from most people's that it can be hard to connect. That social mismatch can be incredibly isolating.
And all of this culminates in burnout cycles. Because high achievers have such a high tolerance for discomfort, they often ignore the early warning signs of burnout: exhaustion, cynicism, a feeling of ineffectiveness. They just see it as another obstacle to push through, until they can't anymore.
Then they crash, hard. And sometimes, even after they reach a massive goal, they experience what's called the achievement hangover. This huge emotional letdown, this what now feeling, because the pursuit itself had become their entire identity and reason for being.
So it's not a sustainable way to live without some very intentional guardrails, which leads us perfectly into our final segment, how high achievers stay mentally healthy.
All right, segment 6. How do you get the upside without the devastating downside? First and foremost, you can't do it alone. Building a support system is critical.
Absolutely. This isn't just friends to vent to, though that's important. It's about intentionally building a multi-layered support network. Mentors who have been where you are, peers who understand the specific challenges of your field, and accountability partners who can call you out when you're slipping into unhealthy patterns. You need people who aren't just cheerleaders, but honest mirrors.
It's about curating your social environment intentionally. Another key strategy is focusing on internal versus external goals. It's also about finding people who won't let you get away with your own excuses. People who understand your drive but can also tell you you need to take a break or you're losing perspective. That kind of honest feedback is invaluable.
Explain that distinction. It's so important.
External goals are about money, status, job titles, awards, validation from others. They're fragile because you don't fully control them. A recession can wipe out your money. A competitor can get the promotion. Internal goals are about growth, mastery, living up to your own values, and the quality of your effort.
Focusing on internal goals protects your mental health because you can always control your effort and your learning. The process itself becomes the reward, not just the outcome. This creates a much more robust and stable foundation for self-worth that can't be taken away by external events.
And speaking of foundations, using rest as a performance tool. This is a massive mindset shift for many high achievers.
They have to stop seeing rest as laziness or a waste of time and start seeing it for what it is, a biological necessity for peak mental and physical performance. We're talking about sleep, proper nutrition, recovery, and creative downtime. The neuroscience is crystal clear. Your brain does some of its most important work, like memory consolidation and creative problem solving, when you're not actively working.
It's when you consolidate memories, solve problems subconsciously. Rest isn't the opposite of work, it's the partner of work. And finally, to combat that identity fusion we talked about, identity diversification.
You can't be just one thing. That's the path to fragility. The healthiest high achievers are also dedicated partners, parents, friends, hobbyists, community members. They have multiple sources of meaning and self-worth. It's like diversifying an investment portfolio. If one area of your life takes a hit, you don't have a complete emotional collapse because your entire sense of self isn't tied up in that one stock.
That's such a perfect analogy. It creates resilience. Wow, we've covered a huge amount of ground today.
We really have. So let's try to recap the core insights. At its heart, high achievement seems to stem from an identity-level drive, a belief in personal control, and the conviction that you can figure things out.
It's fueled by deep curiosity, long-term thinking, and a relationship with failure that sees it as data. But it has to be managed with ruthless prioritization, daily consistency, and structured reflection.
And to avoid the dark side, the perfectionism, the burnout, the loneliness, it requires building support systems, focusing on internal goals, treating rest as essential, and diversifying your identity.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this isn't about some magical innate talent. It's about a set of intentional psychological practices and systems. It's a code you can learn.
That's the perfect closing thought. So we'd love for you to reflect on this. Which of these traits do you see in yourself? Which ones would you want to cultivate? Let us know in the comments.
And if you found this deep dive valuable, please subscribe to the Behavior Code wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks for listening.